The views and opinions expressed by the guests of Sasquatch Experience do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the hosts, sponsors, or affiliates of the Sasquatch Experience. As always, listener discretion is advised.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Does a legend walk among us, lurking in the forests of our world?
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. Looks like a man. I don't know what it was.
For over 15 years, we've talked with scientists, researchers, investigators, and witnesses, trying to gain insight and proof around the existence of this mysterious entity.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Gia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Join us as we continue into the investigation of the Sasquatch Experience. And again, good evening, folks. I'm Sean, the Forkchop Forker, James Baker, Matt Arner, Henry May, Vance Nesbitt on and off with some technical difficulties. We're operating in low power mode here, not on purpose, but we're having some technical difficulties with internet service, but we've found a way to broadcast live to you tonight. So give us a little mercy if things don't go so well. But Henry, a little bit of sad news to kick the show off with. Why don't you go ahead, as you can see down there in the corner, folks, in memory of Bill Braun, longtime researcher, passed away February 15th. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, Bill was one of those researchers that not a whole lot of Bigfooters knew about, but he was one of the most dedicated. You know, he was the one instigated the original A-Bear Road incident from 1976.
Correct.
And he was always nice to me. It's nice he would call me and he would send me letters. Back when we used to send letters. Send me pictures of the fall colors up there in the Northeast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tragic, Henry. I mean, it's never nice to lose anybody in this research, but when you're a little bit more connected to them, Bill was a mentor to one of my good friends, Steve Coles. Steve, of course, posted over the weekend, had a nice tribute to Bill. We interviewed Bill Braun many years ago. I reposted that episode yesterday so folks could go and take a listen. It's important that we understand and recognize our history and where the research comes from and where it's been and where we're going, because I feel like so many people are a part of this, Henry, and they get swept away because they may not be the famous TV personalities and they may not have written 42 books on the subject. But Bill's impact is on us, people that followed his work and people that were, a lot more closely associated with Bill than I was. Seth Breedlove writes last night that if it wasn't for Bill, Beast of Whitehall probably would have never happened. So when you talk about some impact Bill had, aside from that interview he was gracious enough to give us those years ago, he had an impact, and he will be missed, of course, by friends and family and by those of us in the community. We lost another stable, solid voice, and our, hearts go out to his family and his friends. So
Exactly. Absolutely.
Kick the show off in that regard. Guys, tonight we have an interesting show. We want to do something a little different. That big old Sasquatch, right? We're going to talk about Bigfoot creatures that exceed the threshold of reasonable size. And I know over the years I think we've got Vance back here. Sometimes we often scoff at these reports of creatures being over 10 feet tall, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 feet. But these reports happen. And tonight we're going to talk about them. And I think one of the things we have to really recognize right at the front is that, Lauren Coleman, Patrick Hugh, Mark Hall, gentlemen of that generation, really took it seriously, wrote some really good books. I have them right here. There's True Giants, which you can get. This is the Field Guide to Bigfoot and Other Mystery Primates. This is the second edition, I believe. I have the first edition in my library over here. He talks about it as, and Bigfoot, the True Stories of Apes in America. And then also, I got my research materials all over this desk tonight, so bear with me. I know somebody will get on there and say, they're never prepared. Kiss my ass. And then True Stories.
Right.
Giant.
True Giants. Yeah, True Giants.
Is the Gigantopithecus still alive?
Still alive, yeah.
Right. And so, Henry, why don't you, just fill in a little bit on the overview of the True Giants, when you became familiar with the term?
Well, I read that book in 2011. I got a copy of it from Lauren at the John Green Tribute, a signed copy. And he and Mark A. Hall the late Mark A. Hall did quite a bit of work, quite a bit of research on this topic. And they said, well, these may seem like they're true Sasquatch, but they're really not. They're just gigantic. Well, they're covered in hair, so what else would you call them?
Right. The behavior is Sasquatch-like. The footprints are Sasquatch-like, albeit much larger. Now, there have been some interesting encounters of them reported wearing flannel shirts or other pieces of clothing, or, being very large, maybe not so quite bulky and massive, but definitely larger built and kind of lanky. So just interesting to hear some of these stories. Matt, Baker, what do you guys got before we start diving into some of the True Giants?
Well, like if we take it from a man's perspective, like I just looked it up, and like the tallest man was Robert Wadlow, and he was 8'11". And
dude.
You have like people like Andre the Giant. You have some of the people that like you can actually whatever. Most of them died because of structural issues. Like their knees went quicker, and their circulation was a problem in their back and the way they stood because the height, that height made it so hard for them to just, move around consistently. So I would say that if it is a gigantic creature, I'm more on the possibility that it's a gigantic, like a giant that's made structurally to be a giant more than a really large, like 11 or 12 foot, like ape-like creature. I don't know. I go more with the mythical, less than the real life creature that could be 11 to 12 feet high.
Sure. You're a fee-fi-fo-fum man, huh?
Well, because like if you look at, like I said, structurally, like you look at a lot of these people, even athletes over 7 foot tall, or people over 7 foot tall, their knees and their joints start to go because it's so hard just to stand that tall.
Yeah.
Plus doorways must be a bitch.
Yeah, I mean, you're not kidding. Robert Wadlow, you're right. He did, 8'11". They said when he died, his casket was over 10 feet long and weighed over 1,000 pounds. Took, I believe, what did it say here? It took
probably 12 guys,
12 pallbearers and 8 assistants to help
back up.
That's quite a train.
Andre the Giant was so big that when they had to do surgery, they had no clue how much anesthetic or how much stuff to give him. And then they asked one of his coworkers, how much can he drink? And they're like, you don't even want to start that.
Right. And, both of them probably had some form of pituitary issue. Andre the Giant, of course, we know was acromegaly, I believe is what it was called.
Yes.
And he suffered with that for a very long time. And, he was a world attraction. I don't know if he was quite 7'4" as he was billed in the pro wrestling world. Those heights are often, exaggerate a little bit. But, there's that one famous picture where he's standing next to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon, 6 foot. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about him right now, but he's 6'3", and Andre the Giant looks like he's 2 feet taller than Vince McMahon. But, in reality, he's probably a foot taller. So there are a little bit of stage tricks that they used. But Andre, it wasn't just so much the fact that he was he was massive in general.
Large.
Yeah, 500 and some pounds.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite the proportional person. So there's a lot of mass there. And then so we take that and we talk about something that's probably twice the size of Andre the Giant. Think of that.
Mm-hmm.
Twice
Yeah,
the
that-
size.
You have that pop in the office if you want to show a picture of what it kind of looks like. But like that's where I think we need to look at it is, you know, with anything we do in this community, we have to look at a creature that we can poke a stick at, as you say, you know, and say, okay, this is what a ape of this whatever would look like. I didn't look it up, so if somebody knows, maybe Henry knows. Do you know what the largest ape ever was?
Well, that would have been Gigantopithecus.
Gigantopithecus.
Nobody, but we're talking about
I'm out.
creatures that might reach around 10 to 15 feet, at least 10 to 15 feet. Although and there was a sighting, I guess we're going to talk about in 1965 at the Bighorn Dam. I think it was Bighorn Dam site, where these workers claimed they saw a 15-foot Sasquatch.
Well, just think of that height, Henry, and got 15 feet. The ceiling in this room, I believe, is 13 feet. So you're talking about something that's another 2 feet taller than that. That's immense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not insular to that one location. There have been reports up in Maine, Henry, of these creatures being over 10 feet tall. Creatures in Nova Scotia. I was just on a podcast over the weekend, New Labrador. That was it was a paranormal podcast she had me on. She was telling me creature sightings of over 12 feet tall. That's huge. Matt, you were going to say something there, and we kind of went off the trail. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. Hopefully you guys can hear me because I'm having some internet issues myself, but all right, perfect. I mean, there's so much I want to talk about tonight. Obviously, the number one thing that comes from a lot of different researchers is Bergman's rule. So we're not looking at, we're not hearing about these creatures down in Florida, you know, that are, 10, 12 feet tall.
Right.
Generally, the creatures that you're hearing about in Florida could be anywhere from 6 to 8 feet. But the one set of stories that I heard about was about the Nahanni Valley and the headless people of the Nahanni Valley, where I guess there was a couple people that they found their bodies and their heads were missing. And this is in the Northwest Territories.
Bummer.
It is. So this is very close to the Arctic Circle. And the one thing is they were talking about creatures up there that were in excess of 12 feet tall that were in this valley area. So that kind of plays into the whole Bergman's rule that animals, some animals from the same species could be bigger. I think a deer too. If you see a deer, say from Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, they're generally smaller than, say, a Pennsylvania deer. If you look at a deer from Maine, or if we're going out to the West Coast, like Saskatchewan, Alberta, those deer are huge compared, but they're still the same species. And that could be where Bergman's rule comes into play. The only thing that throws Bergman's rule off is humans. Right. So what I did was I researched the average size of the Inuit, which are commonly referred to as Eskimos. It's the Inuit tribe. And I think their average height is about 5'6" for males. It's rather small. So you do have somebody that, a human being that lives in that area closer to the Arctic Circle, but their bodies are smaller than, say, somebody from, from closer to the equator, where especially if you look in certain areas, I mean, you got these guys that are growing, like we just said, 6.5, 7 feet tall. And, they're not coming from Canada, they're not coming from these northern places. But the one kind of quotient that comes into play is not just environment, but nutrition. So that plays a lot into it as well in terms of humans. But humans kind of duck the Bergman's rule as opposed to other species that seem to go along with that.
Why
we
is
have
that
less-
believed to be?
Is that because we have less tribal genetics? Like the Inuit, and the reason that they're all, let's say, 5 foot tall is because everybody there is 5 foot tall. So consistently, the genetics would make a 5 foot tall person. But like if you put a bunch of 7 foot tall people that got, we'll say a plane crashes near an Inuit with a basketball team, and it takes 10 years to find them. And would you have a bunch of 7'6", with the range change? Because you had a new genetic.
That's a good question. Genetics does play a big part of it, but the other part that plays into it too is nutrition. People today, I mean, we as humans have gotten much bigger over the last almost 100 years because of the nutrition that we're having. If I walked up to my great grandfather, I'm 6'4", and most people back in the 1800s, your average size is only about 5'8" or so. So again, as we're kind of changing a little bit, in a faster reaction, but in those northern areas like that, there was an exception with the Vikings. I did research people from Scandinavian countries, and we always talk about the Vikings. There are these big, strong, monstrous people. They were slightly taller, but on the other hand, it goes back to nutrition as well. They had access to certain grain crops because they would go and raid. They had access to obviously all sorts of proteins, all sorts of fats. So there's plenty of variabilities to increase that size. But for the Inuits, a lot of their traditional diet is, rather, a lot of fat content, a lot of protein, but in terms of the carb, yes, yes. You're not talking about the best growing seasons up there in the Arctic. So
you say growing or grilling?
Well, kind of both.
Both, yeah.
You kind of need trees to grill,
Yeah.
But like you make a valid point, and like if you look at like tribal areas where man doesn't interact with other people, let's say for instance, like there was an article I read a little while ago that for like 200 years in France, there was a place that they were all inbreeding because there's no ever, St. Olaf. You got places like there's tribes in Africa that have never seen another person that's not part of their tribe. Then that, and not exactly inbreeding, but I'm just saying that they only have so much genetic whatever. Or like, when England and France and Spain the kings and queens would only go with other kings and queens. And eventually you started to see diseases and different things like that. The same could be with these gigantic animals. If you're in an area where all the apes are only 5 foot tall, you might get a random 7 foot tall ape, but you may have the secondary issue of they may say, that is weird. He doesn't get to mate with any of my children. Do you know what I mean? So, it kind of goes, I don't know that being it's an animal, but on my case, like I said, if it exists, it's got to be smart. There might be that question of he's genetically weird. We're not going to mate with him. Do you know what I mean?
Weird.
But like a deer doesn't care if the deer is in heat. He doesn't care that the other deer is 6 foot and he's only 4 foot. He's just like, if I can get up on, whatever, But all right, I'll be quiet.
That's a good point. I just saw we had a question just posed to us. How long ago was it that people over 6 foot were giants? And really, I mean, you can go back in history and especially like I'm a big Civil War buff, not as big as some of the other, some of our listeners maybe, but I do, delve into it because we're close to Gettysburg, but they would talk about these, giant men who were, like whether they're officers or, in the staffs that were, straddling at 6 feet tall or, 6'2". So it was not as common. It was still,
Right.
you were still getting tall people, but it wasn't as common as you see today.
I miss that train. I'm not considered a giant.
And it could also consider value. Like right now, if you're a taller person, you have some value.
Yes.
You know, if you're certain, like if you're built a certain way, you have value. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, and I would say 100 years ago, if you were built a certain way, you had value. If you were built a different way, they didn't let you, you know, they like said, hey, you go over there with those people, you're not going to get near my daughter, you know. But the thing is now it's like, oh, he's tall at 6 feet. Okay, whatever.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
you know, if they had red hair and green eyes, they weren't a witch. You know.
Yes. So yeah, and even going back to, you were talking about the indigenous people, I was thinking of every so often you see videos of that island in Senegal, off the coast of Senegal, with that the tribe has had literally zero contact with people. There was a missionary that I guess landed on the beach, and they ended up eating them at some point. But
he had a valid. He validly was told multiple times, get off their property.
yeah, oh, he was told, yeah,
And he kept going back. So
Yes.
you know what? From a guy who likes my front yard with nobody on it,
Yeah.
he deserved it.
I
I'm sorry.
agree. Like if you saw the pictures, like, you know, I believe it's under the under the jurisdiction of India, and the Indian Navy actually patrols that area so that there's no
They have
contact. But
buoys and
occasionally,
everything.
yes, but they will occasionally take pictures, and when you see the pictures, you know, they're a taller people. You know, they're generally tall. They have the long arms, quite different than what you see, you know, with the Inuit tribes throughout Canada and Alaska.
Solid points. Guys, we're going to take our quick news break here, see if we can rally and reboot. And when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. True giants. Maybe get into some true giant stories when we come back with the Sasquatch Experience. Folks, stick around.
News team, assemble!
And so you figure that would take about 5 seconds for the world to win, but no, it was actually close. Then about 30 years pass, and Germany decides again to go to war, and again it chooses as its enemy the world. And this time they have that guy, Schrankly, that guy, and I'm not even going to dignify him by saying his name, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Ah, yes, the soft and velvety sounds of Norm MacDonald. This is the Bigfoot Bullhorn, exclusively on the Sasquatch Experience, and a happy Monday night to you all. I hope your weekend recovery has gone well, but why did we bring up the Germany thing? Well, it's kind of ironic. Germany's not really known for its sense of humor, so a study was done out of Munich, Germany. What's so funny? Well, a new study suggests that apes possess a sense of humor just like humans. An international team has discovered that 4 species of great apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas, all engage in playful teasing with one another. This behavior, identified by cognitive biologist and primatologist, mirrors human joking in its provocation, persistent nature, incorporating elements of surprise and play. The findings indicate that all 4 great ape species engage in this playful teasing, leading the research team to propose that the foundational elements of humor may have evolved in the human lineage at least 13 million years ago. Now, according to researchers, humor plays a crucial role in human interactions, relying on social intelligence, the ability to predict future actions, and the recognition and appreciation of others. Expectations are to be defined. Teasing shares many similarities with joking, suggesting that playful teasing could serve as a cognitive precursor to humor. The researchers conducted an analysis of spontaneous social interactions among apes that were playful, mildly harassing, or provocative in nature. During these interactions, they closely observed the actions, body movements, and facial expressions of the apes initiating the teasing, as well as the reactions from those being teased. It was common for teasers to repeatedly wave or swing body parts or an object in the middle of the target's field of vision, hit or poke them, stare closely at their face, disrupt their movements, pull on their hair, or perform other behaviors that were extremely difficult for the target to ignore. Although playful teasing took many forms in the study, researchers say it still differed from play in many ways. Playful teasing in the great apes is one-sided, very much coming from the teaser, often throughout the entire interaction and rarely reciprocated. The animals also rarely use play signals like the primate play face, which is similar to what we would call a smile, or hold gestures that signal their intent to play. The team also found that playful teasing mainly took place when the apes were relaxed and their behavior shared similarities with human behaviors. When we come back, it's the march to Georgia.
You're listening to the Bigfoot Bullhorn right here on the Sasquatch Experience.
Do you have an annoying car? Do you have an annoying teen? Is your annoying teen eating up the dollars you need to replace your annoying car? Does it feel like you'll never get that dream car that you promised yourself when you grew up? Are you looking for a solution? Willing to try a new idea? Well, Chris's Cars for Kids could have just the answer you're looking for. Come on down to your local Chris's Cars for Kids dealership and see what's on offer. Don't forget to bring your old car. And most importantly, that spare teenager that's been cluttering up your kitchen. You bring your kid in, sign some quick paperwork, and pick out your car.
Children are not refundable. Terms and conditions apply.
And that's that. You just drive away.
Well, the first 6 years must have been extremely successful because this time it's the 7th annual Georgia Bigfoot Conference. The 7th Georgia Bigfoot Conference will be held at the Dillard House in Dillard, Georgia on March 15th through the 16th, 2024. The event is sponsored by Mind Zero, Matman Foundation LLC, and R.M. Rose Distillery, and features keynote speakers Ron Moorhead, Brooks Agnew, Robin Haynes McCrae, Christian McLeod, and Sonia Thompson. Enjoy a reception and roundtables, cryptid-themed cocktails, vendor booths, stories, activities, fellowship, and Georgia Bigfoot Banquet. Thanks again for listening to this edition of the Bigfoot Bullhorn right here on the Sasquatch Experience. And you know what to do, right, guys?
Keep your toes in the mud.
Thanks, Vance. I know you're not here, but I know you're hearing this somewhere. A lot of hears. Anyhow, folks, I'm Sean the Forkchop Forker. That's James Baker, Matt Arner, Henry May. Your guides and hosts for tonight's episode of the Sasquatch Experience, episode 95, That Big Old Sasquatch, talking about true giants. And Matt was hitting us with some heavy facts before we jumped off to the break. And guys, some great stories, from the Pitt Lake, British Columbia area of some really large size Sasquatch. Henry, are you familiar with the Pitt Lake stories?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I may
Stumping
have
Henry
read
May
about
here.
them. I may have read about them, but I don't remember much about them.
So, the problem is it's not a topic we talk about a lot. Again, as we had this conversation. It happened in the 1960s to 65. You can find this on BigfootEncounters.com. Of course, Bobby Short's fantastic website still out there on the internet. Bobby might have passed on, but her legacy still lives on with the Bigfoot Encounters website. Great restores for historical Bigfoot stories. If you get a chance, go check that out. Pitt Lake is 20 to 35 miles up the Fraser River from Vancouver, BC. It is very rare that it's one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world affected directly by the Pacific Ocean tides. That's an interesting fact for you. An incident in the early 1960s. This, of course, is an article by Ken Christian. Go back to where I was in that article because I wanted to quote the author. An incident in the early 1960s got me interested in the subject of Sasquatch when something like this. A logging company owner by the name of Joe Manook had a similar show at a place on Pitt Lake called Frenchman's Bay, now known as Christian Cove on the maps. He went up the mountain about 1 mile or so to get at some big timber and a very steep and rugged canyon. In the process of setting up a temporary camp for his crew, he towed a wood frame and plywood cook bunkhouse on a 3-foot round skid logs up the valley with a D8 cat. That's some sort of equipment. After he logged the show and got most of the good wood out, he left the old cook bunkhouse up there for family and friends to use as a hunting cabin. And one weekend during the fall of 1962, my friends Fred, Ron, and Vince headed up to the area for some blacktail hunting. Of course, they're talking about blacktail deer. They reached the place on a Friday afternoon and proceeded to give the old cabin a quick sweep to get rid of the mouse droppings, chop enough firewood to last a couple days, cook some dinner, and then they hit the sack for some early, much-needed rest. Sometime during the middle of the night, they were all rudely awakened by a massive crash of something hitting the outside of the cabin, hard enough to dislodge the stovepipes and fill the entire cabin with black soot and choking smoke. At first light in the morning, they inspected the cabin fully. They expected the cabin, fully expecting to find a giant boulder, claw marks from a big bear, or some other such sign on the outside walls, but found nothing. I went up the following weekend on a hunting trip and had a good look around the cabin for myself. I found no broken branches on any of the small alders that had sprung up besides the cabin, or anything else to indicate something with a rational explanation responsible could have crashed into the cabin. Over the years, I often pondered the thought of what could possibly hit the cabin walls so high up above the skid logs, on the bunk side where everyone was sleeping and probably snoring a bit, with the force required to knock the stove and its pipes completely out of commission. Not a one of us could figure this out until a later date when the stories of Sasquatch began to quietly circulate among the area's loggers. In the late 1960s, myself and a few other commercial fishermen and old hand loggers went to visit Oscar Greenland, now deceased, a longtime hand logger and permanent resident of Pitt Lake. Oscar seemed to enjoy our visits as we always brought a bottle of his favorite gin and some type of a treat for his faithful old dog. Sometime during the long-hour BS session, the subject of Sasquatch was injected into the noisy conversation. Oscar told us about a time some years back when he was heading up the lake towards home at first light on a beautiful summer morning. He went on to explain that the lake was as flat as glass and there wasn't a breath of wind. As they were heading out from point to point, he happened to glance towards the shoreline and noticed a rhythmic splashing about 300 yards away. Out of curiosity, he decided to head his old Eastop-powered ex-grill netter towards the beach in case someone was in trouble. As he got closer, he noticed a downed alder or cottonwood tree laying in the water with what appeared to be a huge, dark-colored man-ape jumping up and down on it, looking for all the world like it was simply playing and totally amused by the splashes it was making in the water. This damn thing's playing in the water. Oscar went on to explain that once the ape-like creature spotted him getting closer, it went up the tree faster than any man could have possibly gone and quickly disappeared into the bush. Old Oscar then asked if we thought there were any grizzly bears in the Pitt Lake country. While none of us had ever seen or heard of a grizzly bear down low in his general neck of the woods, we asked him why he inquired. Oscar said that one day he was up behind his cabin cutting shake blocks when his dog suddenly began to growl, bark, and generally go crazy. Oscar said he stared in the direction the dog's gaze was fixed upon and saw what he thought was about an 8-foot or taller grizzly standing on its hind legs, partially hidden behind some alders. Oscar went on to say that he heard plenty of bears grunt and cougars scream in the days in the bush, but never heard such a tremendously loud roar come from out of any animal he knew of. So that one was about 8 feet tall. And there's another story that goes around in 1995 in the same area. They find a fresh set of 17-inch Sasquatch tracks. And then another story around that 60 to 65 time where they saw a 12-foot tall black Sasquatch in that area. And so the Pitt Lake area, as you could see in that 60s to 65 time, had quite a number of sightings reported. Think about that, something large enough and impactful enough to hit the side of that cabin and knock the stovepipe out of the wall. That's got shades of Ape Canyon to that story. Something 8 feet tall or larger. And that's pretty damn big. I mean, even 8 feet is still a little bit larger than an acceptable creature should be.
Well, I was going to say, in the research I was doing too, grizzly bears, and again, these are, not in that particular area, but grizzly bears could be, standing on their hind legs up to 10 feet tall, and then a polar bear would be up to 12. So, but if you're not seeing a polar bear, walking around in, southern, British Columbia or in those areas.
That would be rather outside their region.
Correct.
Right. But there was talk of that hybrid. I don't remember the name of that. Do you know what I'm referring to? It was an Alaskan killer bear. It was like the hybrid of the grizzly and polar. And it was really large, like 13 or 14 feet tall, massive claws on it. And I don't know if they ever found any truth behind that or not. But you know what I'm referring to, man.
Yes. Yep.
What else we got out there for stories of the big fella? Pretty interesting. Henry, you got any stories of true giants? There we go.
Well, I wanted to mention, I kind of touched on it earlier, but the story at Bighorn Dam in, I think it was Alberta, where several workers spotted what they estimated to be a 15-foot tall creature standing there watching them. And the way they determined it was 15 feet was they went over there later and they measured a tree, which, and they compared, they made a comparison. Mm-hmm. They realized, holy crap, that thing was 15 feet tall.
Well, the nice thing is when you have a tree so close, you can go and actually get a physical measurement of that. It makes all the difference in the world when you can really get a true accurate height assessment. And so you're measuring something 10 to 15 feet. Could you imagine how just massive that is just in scope when you're seeing that for the first time? Like I'm trying to, just imagine, Matt, you and I standing at a vista and all of a sudden looking out and there's a 15 tall ape looking at us. I'd be shitting a brick. I don't know if I could handle that, to be honest with you. That's scary. And these reports, like I said, though uncommon, they're not, they're uncommon in many areas, but also in Alabama, there was a story of a 12-foot tall Sasquatch creature, and they called it Big Joe. It was seen by 4 people in Alabama State Route 22 in Tallapoosa County, documented by Bigfoot researcher Jim Smith. This is on Phantoms and Monsters website. Took place within a 4-mile radius around mile marker 135, and Big Joe, as they called it, was spotted twice within a 4-week time. And according to Jim, the first report was submitted by a woman who claimed to have been driving on the night of Halloween when they spotted the creature. There's a hunting trail that goes into the woods. When they came upon the curve, they looked out the woods and saw the black Bigfoot walking down through the woods. And again, like they said, just massively tall creature, 12 feet. And that, coming from Alabama, that's a rarity because in the South, they tend to be a little smaller. Less built and a little bit more swamp ape like. This thing's about double the size of a swamp ape. So you go back to James Baker's genetic freaks there, or you got, is there another, potentiality for a different type of specimen down in the swamps of Alabama? James Baker, you still with us? You alive?
Yes.
Okay.
Or are they taking a vacation? Yeah.
Yeah.
That could be
And bake-
accurate. It matters what the seasonal would be.
Yeah. Well, this was in the fall,
Yeah. But
12
may
feet
have
tall.
been
That's down in your neck of the woods, Henry.
Yes, that's right next door to us, Mississippi.
Yeah. Do you have any 12-foot? Do you have any large creature sightings in Mississippi, Henry, that you know of firsthand that you've collected over the years?
All I know is that there have been 8-foot tall ones here in Mississippi. I don't know about taller than that. Not 12 foot anyway.
8-foot tall, according to the Field Guide to Primates and Other Mystery Apes, that's considered a neogiant by Coleman and Hugh and Hall. But still sizable creatures. And again, when you're normally looking for something 6 to 8 feet tall, you think anything over the 8-foot tall is a little bit of an aberration. But then you start getting into the conversation of, are they male or females? The sexual dimorphism in different groups, is this one of those situations where the women are bigger than the men in the hierarchy? And we just don't know. You look at Patty as the Patterson-Gimlin creature. She's 6 feet, 7 feet tall. But is that considered average height for a Sasquatch? In California, you don't get a whole lot of, variation. But so when you talk about plausibility of these reports, guys, and we start getting sighting reports of something that's 7 to 8 to 10 feet tall, on your credibility scale, when you're first hearing that, where does it go? Where does your meter start ticking off?
I think it's how they present it more than what the sizing is. If they're giving you, it's 900 pounds and 5 feet tall, and darn well there's got to be some kind of differential, but if they're telling you, hey, it was about what I feel of this, and some of the other conversational of like how they feel like the hands to feet ratio and things like that. And I realize not everybody you're going to talk to is a scientist, but like if they're telling you that it's, it was 11 feet tall, okay, what did you judge that by? And then they give you some gibberish answer. Then that's when I'm more inclined to say, okay, you may be overshooting it,
Well, fair enough. What about you, Matt?
Well, I'm going to go right in along with James there, that a lot of people, first you have the shock of what you're seeing. This is not something you see every day. Unless you're a habituator, but it's not something you see every day. Most people, do, form a trauma, over seeing something that they didn't think ever, was supposed to, be alive or be around. Generally with that, and I've seen this with my job, is people will exaggerate, that, they'll, when the creature may be, 6, maybe 7 feet tall, they might say, hey, it was way big. It had to be, 10, 12 feet tall. I do take a special consideration if the person's a trained observer, if it's a police officer, if it's somebody from the military, veteran. Those people are trained observers. They'll hopefully keep their wits about them a little bit more and be able to establish, okay, this is what that size was. But I think for the general person off the street that's going hiking and not expecting to see something, or they're driving down the road, a dark road in the middle of the night, kind of like what happened with my mom, and she sees this thing, well, hey, you know what? It's bigger than her, so it's going to be, oh my God, 10 feet tall. We did have one report, and I think you're familiar with this, but I can't give too many details. This was reported to us. So it was actually right down the road from my house. And the lady, who was a young girl at the time, saw something staring in the window. And behind her house, it's mountain, and then it goes into abandoned coal mining operation, which is, they don't use it anymore. It's basically kids just, going out there and riding ATVs and such. But whatever this was, she said it was looking at her window, and from the ground to that window, which was in the kitchen, was 7.5 feet tall. So unless this thing was up on its toes,
Sure.
Even if it was up on its toes, it's still pretty darn big. So with something like that, if you have a fixed object like that, a lot of people use trees. I think, that's a pretty good reference point.
Well, from working at a convenience store, that's why they have that little tape all the way around the thing that has sizes, so that if you do get robbed or whatever, you could kind of look at it real quick to kind of judge where their head is to get an idea of what their height is.
Yep.
Well, one of the things I was going to add there with what you were saying, so much, I think we have to also delineate what people are experiencing. And so trace evidence that's left at a certain height may not necessarily mean that's the height of the creature. That's the area of the reach. And I think sometimes in the excitement, that confusion may add a little bit of embellishment to the story. I mean, not necessarily always, but you see a handprint up 13 feet, all of a sudden, oh my God, this thing was 13 feet tall. Well, maybe not. Hold on. It could have just been resting its hands up there. But even if that's the case, you're still looking at something like 8 to 9 feet tall or more with a pretty large reach.
It's been a while since I had to go to the tailor, to get fitted for either uniforms or, a dress code or something. But I mean, my arms are, I'll try to go back here. I mean, on top of me being 6'4", I can raise that arm up pretty high. And if I am something that's, used to, being with the trees, if I'm going to use that tree either as a tool to hide, or some people claim that they do climb trees as well, or use the branches, I mean, if you have something that's 6.5 feet tall and they raise that arm's going to look really, really big. And especially if it's a Sasquatch arm, that's probably 3-4 times the size of mine, in terms of width. So
another massive appendage hanging out.
Yeah. Yep.
What were we going to say, Ben? Go ahead.
That wasn't its arm.
Oh.
But the also thing you got to look at is that, a lot of these situations where they say, well, it shook my house or whatever. Well, how do you know that's not a leaping arm? Like I'm 5'11", but when I leap, I'm 6'4". You know what I mean?
Yep.
If I think I might be taller than that, but I don't know. I'll have to test it. I'm not much.
I thought you were about 6 foot tall there. Blake. I thought you were.
Well, no, I mean when I leap,
I've not seen you jump, so I can't really. White men can't jump, or at least white bakers can't jump.
It's more of a reactionary jump. It's usually a backwards motion more than a forward.
The last time
motion.
I seen you react to something in terror, you almost cut your leg off with a pruner. So, he thought it was a snake, and instead of jumping and moving, he just takes his blade and just starts cutting away at whatever's near his leg. If it was a chainsaw, he'd be one appendage less. But
damn right.
Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. The Pennsylvania chainsaw dismemberment.
Yeah.
Again, these stories, permeate a lot of the northern states, Canada, when we go think about the Manitoba footage, Henry, Bobby Clark Manitoba footage from the early 2000s, they estimated that creature at about 10 feet tall, I believe, if my memory serves me correct. That was the footage that was bought by a current affair. It was hot for a good New York minute, and then it was gone. And just as quick as it appeared, it didn't have long lasting. It was really bad quality, though. Was it not, Henry?
Yeah, it was basically a blob squatch, you might say.
Yeah. That was taken from a riverboat, right? Or some sort of boat. And it was of a Bigfoot walking along the shoreline. I'm trying to remember vaguely, but it's just as we're sitting here talking, I'm like, well, that's again, potential evidence, but it was so poor quality, you couldn't tell what it was. But it was enough for a current affair to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's not saying much. I think they also tried to get Al Capone's tomb opened up, but a vault. I'm sorry, not his tomb, his vault. Geraldo. Go ahead, Henry. What were you going to say, bud?
And the current affair also sent an expedition up there.
Trying to pull some information on that because again, I think Bobby Clark also passed away not long. Then we started talking about the Bigfoot curse. Remember? That's another episode we should do, the Bigfoot curse. People dying. I'm just doing a quick Google search here for the footage to see if I could pop it up. Yeah. You know, what's sad is I've been trying to go through and find stories today for the episode, and it's difficult. I had to get into books, guys. I had to get back into the books and do some searching for this. There's another good book right here, Bigfoot, The True Stories of Apes in America by Lauren Coleman. It's one of my top 10.
All right.
I mean, another story, it's more of a fable. And if you ask any vet, especially anyone that was deployed, it's a story, but they always talk about the Kandahar giant.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on that.
Yes. So, but apparently the story kind of comes out all throughout that in Middle East and in parts of Asia, particularly from Afghanistan into Iran, Pakistan, where you have these giants that live in these mountains. It sounds like a Sasquatch, but to them, they consider them men, and a lot of times they use tools. They may be clothed. They look more human. Although to me, it almost sounds like it's more of an Alma, than really anything else. Yeah.
In Maine, there's stories of this, and you guys can go into Lauren Coleman's book that we're looking here. Page 29 starts talking about some of the giants in Maine, the Strendu, which are cannibals. A lot of these creatures that, we consider to be Sasquatch are fall under the cannibal giants in Native American lore. And though they're hair covered and they're considered, like you said, Matt, more giant creatures or Indians, people, than they are of a man-like beast. And of course, that Sasquatch, that's
yes,
sold into their.
And I'm trying to find there's a book I was reading that's not anything having to do with Bigfoot, but it was called When Fur Was King, 40 Years in the Hudson Bay Company. And it's written by Henry Moberly. And it basically, it's a great book for somebody that's into the backcountry and, going into the bush and especially from that time period. But it's funny because there was a part where I guess him and somebody else were stranded in an area, and the natives, and I believe it was Cree, had told them to watch out because there was a cannibal. And now they consider that person another native, another indigenous person, but they said that there was a cannibal that was in that particular mountain range. They didn't have any contact with it, but they were told about it. So that was kind of interesting as well.
And you got the stories of. Go ahead, James.
Does that fall under more of a Wendigo than a Bigfoot? I mean, I always feel like when you talk about some of the native stories and some of these stories about don't, go to certain areas, they were more protectant towards not, there was something important there. They didn't want them to bother.
Sure.
Or, like the worst.
Or there was something there that could have harmed them as well.
Right. But the worst movie I ever saw was The Village. It wasn't made badly, but at the end just pissed me off. And I can go into that for an hour. But but the fact is that they created something to keep everybody in line, keep everybody in the village, keep everybody whatever, because a lot of the Native Americans and a lot of the native tribes realized that if you went too far from the village, other tribes could have killed you.
Yeah.
Your carnivore, your savage was just another tribe. And if you went too far, kind of like, if you're, go from one country to another, by accident, you could be killed because you don't belong there. And I think some of these stories originated the same way. Was, hey, don't go past this ridge because that's not our area and it's unsafe. And then the kid was like, well, I'm a big man. No, it's a spirit. Just don't,
The one thing is that when you look at the Wendigo, depending on which tribe and which folklore you listen to, some of them are this tall, lanky, creature. And what we're talking about today, especially with some of the sightings that they've had, particularly in Northwest Canada, are these tall, lanky Bigfoot. So is there a correlation between the Wendigo and maybe they had seen them generations ago and they're using that as a model to scare the youth not to stray away from the tribe?
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll get a Wendigo guy on here and we'll talk about that, get a little delineation and help educate us not so educated on the native mythos of Sasquatch, and which we should be, shame on us, but we'll get an expert on here to help talk to us through the differences on that on an upcoming program, because I think that'd be fun for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, that's time for tonight. 10 o'clock. Man, that hour flew, and we were just, again, glancing over things. I'd like to thank you all for bearing with us with the little technical difficulties tonight. Internet connection is a little tough, but we were able to rebound. On behalf of Vance, thank you. Vance was having, as you could tell, moments, a very difficult time tonight getting things together, but he sends his regards to the audience and apologies. Next week, we'll be posting the show here and on our social media. You can find all our information for Sasquatch Experience on our social media pages here. We got a little going on. Squatch EXP on X and Sasquatch Experience on Facebook and Instagram. Of course, you can connect with all of us at Cryptic Wilderness with Matt Arner there, at Sean Forker. I'm my name everywhere. And Henry May, you can find him on Facebook and OnlyFans. James Baker is just now allowed back on the internet, so you can find him, somewhere else. If you can
Also
find
featured
me,
at certain post offices.
yeah. If you haven't already done so, and for some reason enjoy what we do, we have a Patreon for as little as $2 a month. You can support the show with mostly ad-free. Added some bonus content on there this weekend. You got James Baker's hot takes, short little video of James Baker talking about some. Well, you have to become a subscriber to find out what he's talking about. I think it's worth that in itself is worth it. He'll be doing a lot more of those hot takes coming through, and a few more pieces of some bonus material we got coming. You can if Patreon is not something that's up your fancy, we do have another way to support us through the Spreaker. You can go right to Spreaker, search Sasquatch Experience. There's a button that says support, and you can do that for $2 a month. We like the $2. We think it's affordable for everyone. We've got more platforms and more levels you can join, but we try to make this free and fun for everyone. And those of you that support, we thank you. We can't do it without you. I'm struggling. Everybody, I have no idea why.
Everybody, we're going sprinking.
Nobody. Goodness gracious. Nobody. And aside from just talking about Bigfoot, we also research subjects. So if you have a sighting or encounter you'd wish to share with us, info@sasquatchexperience.com, or go to our website, sasquatchexperience.com, and click on report, and it'll pull up a form. And of course, you can share that with us, and we keep it confidential unless you tell us we can actually talk about it. I think I burned through all that material in a decent amount of time. Henry, take us out with those dulcet tones.
Y'all be good or be good headed.
Keep on squatching, folks. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Sasquatch Experience. Please rate and review where this podcast has been consumed. To share your experience, visit us on Facebook, our website, or email us, info@sasquatchexperience.com. Keep on squatching.